What if I told you that beneath the strobe lights of a Soviet nightclub, intelligence operatives were learning to hide surveillance devices inside the most overlooked substance on the human body? In the heart of Cold War Moscow, a clandestine training facility, disguised as Discoteca Cosmos, taught agents to exploit cerumen deposits, transform polyrhythmic movement into dead-drop choreography, and weaponize the social physics of nightlife itself. Before we dive into one of the most bizarre chapters of espionage history, if you're fascinated by the hidden mechanics of intelligence warfare and the strange intersection of culture and covert ops, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel uncovers the stories that textbooks redact, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The year was 1983, and while Western intelligence agencies obsessed over microfilm and radio transmitters, a unit within the KGB's 16th Directorate was perfecting something far stranger. They called it Operation Voskovo Canal, or Wax Channel. The premise sounds like rejected spy fiction. Train operatives to secrete microscopic data capsules within their own ear canals, then transfer these biological dead drops during the controlled chaos of a dance floor collision. But this wasn't fiction. This was the brainchild of Major Yevgeny, a signals intelligence officer who'd spent 2 years studying the acoustic properties of human cerumen at the Sakharov Institute of Evolutionary Physiology. Karpov discovered that earwax, specifically the wet phenotype common in Caucasian populations, could be chemically treated to create a stable matrix for embedding titanium microfilaments no thicker than a human hair. These filaments, coated in a conductive polymer developed at the Kurchatov Institute, could store up to 16 kilobytes of encrypted data using a primitive form of molecular memory storage. The beauty of the system was its biological camouflage. Airport metal detectors ignored it, X-ray machines saw only organic tissue, and even under direct visual inspection, the capsules appeared as nothing more than ordinary earwax buildup. But Karpov faced a critical problem. How do you train agents to reliably transfer something from inside their ear canal to a target without arousing suspicion? Traditional brush-pass techniques were too obvious. Dead drops required infrastructure. That's when he found his answer in the most unlikely place: the discotheque subculture exploding across Eastern Europe. Soviet youth, starved for Western culture, had created an underground network of illegal dance venues, where bodies pressed together in darkness, where physical contact was not just accepted but expected. These spaces operated in a legal gray zone, tolerated by authorities who saw them as pressure valves for youth discontent. Karpov realized that a choreographed collision on a crowded dance floor, timed to a bass drop or strobe effect, could provide the perfect cover for his biological dead drop. But he needed operatives who could move with the unconscious fluidity of real dancers, who could navigate the chaotic geometry of a disco without appearing to calculate their trajectories. Enter Discoteca Cosmose, Koforte Gymnasium in Moscow's Komovniki district. The two casual observers appeared to be just another venue catering to the city's disco-hungry youth. The club opened its doors in April of 1982, with all the trappings of legitimate nightlife. American funk records smuggled through diplomatic channels, a light system cobbled together from theatrical equipment. Even a resident DJ named Volodya, who'd learned his craft studying bootleg recordings of Larry Levin's Paradise Garage sets. But 3 nights a week, after the civilian crowd dispersed around 2 in the morning, a different clientele arrived through a service entrance on Komsomolsky Prospect. These were Karpov's recruits, men and women selected not from the typical KGB candidate pool, but from the Soviet Union's ballet academies, gymnastics programs, and even its experimental dance collectives. The training regimen they underwent makes conventional espionage preparation look quaint by comparison. The curriculum at Cosmos began with what instructors called prostranstveni, navigatia, or spatial navigation. Recruits learned to map dance floor topography using only peripheral vision and proprioceptive feedback. They studied the behavioral physics of crowd dynamics, how bodies move in response to tempo changes, how personal space contracts and expands with different musical genres, how alcohol consumption affects collision probability. One exercise required operatives to cross a crowded floor while maintaining constant awareness of every person within a 3-meter radius, predicting their trajectories 6 beats ahead based on their current movement patterns. This wasn't just about memorizing steps. It required developing what cognitive scientists would later call situational flow state, the ability to process massive amounts of environmental data subconsciously while maintaining a facade of spontaneous enjoyment. The second phase introduced the actual mechanics of capsule transfer. Each operative was fitted with a custom fabricated extraction device, disguised as a vintage Poljo wristwatch. The watch's crown concealed a miniature pneumatic system that, when pressed in a specific sequence, would create negative pressure in a hollow tube extending to a modified earpiece. This allowed the operative to discreetly extract the cerumen capsule from their ear canal and position it against their temple, where it adhered using the same van der Waals forces that make geckos grip walls. The transfer itself happened during what trainers called the moment of maximum entropy, typically when two dancers collided during a particularly frenetic passage of music. The operative would press their temple against the target's ear, ostensibly to shout a comment or the music, and the capsule would transfer through a combination of body heat, moisture, and deliberate pressure. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. To one observer, it looked like nothing more than two people attempting to communicate in a loud environment. But here's where the operation's true sophistication emerged. Karpov understood that for this system to work in the field, his operatives needed to be perceived as authentic members of disco culture, not tourists, awkwardly mimicking moves learned in sterile training rooms. So he did something unprecedented in intelligence history. He embedded his trainees in Moscow's actual underground disco scene for months at a time. They attended real parties at venues like the legendary developed genuine relationships with civilian dancers, absorbed the unwritten codes and tribal knowledge that separated true participants from curious outsiders. Some operatives became minor celebrities in this subculture, known for particular moves or signature styles. A few even DJ'd at underground parties, using their musical knowledge as cover for establishing networks of potential assets. The KGB was essentially creating a parallel intelligence network that operated through cultural capital rather than traditional tradecraft. The technical specifications of the data capsules themselves represent a fascinating dead end in the evolution of information storage. Manufactured at a classified facility near Open, each capsule measured approximately 2 millimeters in length and 0.5 millimeter in diameter. The titanium housing was precisely threaded to create a hermetic seal, protecting the internal molecular memory matrix from moisture and temperature fluctuations. This matrix consisted of a polymer film embedded with trillions of molecules that could be switched between two stable states using precisely calibrated electrical pulses. The encoding process required specialized equipment that could manipulate individual molecular orientations, essentially writing data at the atomic level. A single capsule could store the equivalent of roughly 60 typewritten pages, enough for agent identification codes, rendezvous coordinates, encryption keys, and brief intelligence summaries. The capsules were designed to be readable exactly once. Attempting to extract data would irreversibly scramble the molecular orientation, rendering the information unrecoverable. This built-in security feature meant that even if a capsule was intercepted, it would be useless to enemy crypto. Now, you might be wondering how operatives actually encoded information into these molecular memory matrices. The process involved a device that looked disturbingly like vintage Soviet dental equipment. The operative would insert the blank capsule into a receptor chamber, then use a keyboard interface to input their intelligence report. The machine would convert this text into binary code, then generate a series of precisely timed electromagnetic pulses that flipped molecular dipoles within the polymer matrix. The encoding process took approximately 40 minutes per capsule and required the operative to remain in a secure facility with stable temperature and electromagnetic shielding. This limitation meant that wax channel operatives couldn't encode information in the field. Instead, they received preloaded capsules from handlers, with the understanding that the information had a very short operational lifespan. In the fast-moving world of Cold War intelligence, data that was 48 hours old might as well be ancient history. The operational deployment of wax channel agents reveals just how seriously the KGB took this program. Between 1983 and 1986, at least 40 operatives were inserted into Western European capitals, always in cities with active disco and dance club scenes: London, West Berlin, Amsterdam, and surprisingly, Belgrade. Each hosted multiple wax channel agents who would spend weeks or months establishing themselves in local nightlife before activating for intelligence operations. Their targets weren't the usual diplomatic or military personnel that occupied traditional intelligence efforts. Instead, Wax Channel focused on what internal KGB documents called the cultural infrastructure: artists, musicians, club promoters, fashion designers, and other creative professionals who moved fluidly between East and West. These individuals often had access to social networks that crossed Cold War boundaries, making them valuable for identifying potential recruits or mapping influence networks that conventional intelligence agencies overlooked. One particularly successful operation involved an agent known only by the cryptid Resonance, who operated out of West Berlin's notorious Kreuzberg district. Resonance, whose real identity remains classified, posed as a Romanian refugee with connections to Bucharest's underground music scene. Over 18 months, this operative became a fixture at clubs like SO36 and Risico, known for introducing Eastern European electronic music to West Berlin's avant. But Resonance wasn't just promoting cultural exchange through carefully choreographed dance floor encounters. This single agent transferred intelligence capsules to at least 9 different assets, creating a network that provided Moscow with detailed information about West German defense contractors, NATO communication protocols, and even early developments in what would become the Strategic Defense Initiative. The elegance of the operation was that it generated almost no traditional intelligence signature. There were no suspicious meetings in parks, no coded radio transmissions, no traceable financial transactions, just a music enthusiast attending parties and occasionally bumping into people on crowded dance floors. However, not everything went according to plan. In March of 1985, a wax channel operative designated Pulsevan encountered an unexpected problem during a transfer attempt at Amsterdam's Paradiso Club. The target, a Dutch telecommunications engineer with access to NATO satellite encryption systems, had recently recovered from an ear infection and had been prescribed antibiotic ear drops. When Pulsevan attempted the transfer, the capsule failed to adhere to the target's ear canal due to residual medication, creating an unexpected chemical barrier. Worse, the capsule fell onto the dance floor, where it was almost immediately crushed under someone's shoe. This incident triggered a minor panic at Cosmos headquarters, because the crushed capsule, while it destroyed, could theoretically be analyzed if recovered by Western intelligence. It forced a complete review of the program's security protocols and led to the development of a secondary retrieval system using modified vacuum systems disguised as portable music players. The most intriguing aspect of Operation Wax Channel emerged in late 1985, when Major Karpov proposed an expansion that would have transformed the program from intelligence collection into active measures. He envisioned a reverse capability where operatives could receive encoded instructions from Moscow through biological capsules planted by handlers in Soviet-controlled venues, then travel west to execute operations without any subsequent communication. This would create what cryptographers call a perfect air-gap system, where the operative has no traceable connection to their command structure once deployed. Karpov even developed preliminary specifications for a self-dissolving capsule that would break down completely after data extraction, leaving no physical evidence. But this expansion never materialized, not because of technical limitations, but because of political ones. By late 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost reforms were beginning to reshape Soviet society. The KGB's priorities shifted from elaborate covert operations to damage control as the Soviet system began its terminal decline. The program's conclusion remains murky, according to declassified Stasi documents that surfaced after German reunification. Discoteca Cosmos continued operating as a legitimate nightclub until sometime in 1980, though its intelligence function had apparently ceased by early 1980s. Former patrons interviewed in the 2000s remembered it as just another Moscow disco, notable mainly for having better music and stricter door policies than competing venues. None recalled anything unusual about the space or its clientele. The gymnasium that housed Cosmos was demolished in 1994 to make way for luxury apartments. No physical evidence of its intelligence function survived, or at least none that's entered the public record. The molecular memory capsules, along with the equipment to encode and read them, presumably remain locked in FSB archives. Technological curiosities from an era when intelligence agencies were willing to explore truly exotic solutions to operational problems. But here's where the story takes its strangest turn, one that wasn't even suspected until a former East German signals intelligence officer named Rainer Kessler gave a series of interviews to German media in 2009. According to Kessler, who claimed to have worked on the technical aspects of a related program run by the Stasi, the molecular memory technology used in wax channel capsules wasn't originally developed for espionage at all. It started as Soviet research into non-volatile memory systems for spacecraft, specifically for Venus lander missions, where extreme temperatures and electromagnetic interference made conventional electronics useless. Researchers at the Kirchhoff Institute had been experimenting with molecular dipole switching as a way to create memory systems that could survive Venus's surface conditions. Somehow, and Kessler claimed not to know the exact pathway, this research caught the attention of the KGB's technical directorate, who immediately recognized its potential for covert communications. The Cold War has countless examples of military technology being adapted for civilian use, but this might be the only case of space exploration technology being adapted for biological espionage. The implications of this connection are genuinely fascinating from a technology history perspective. It suggests that buried somewhere in the Soviet space program's archives, there might be documentation of molecular memory systems that predated Western developments in the field by over a decade. Contemporary molecular electronics didn't emerge as a serious research discipline until the mid-1990s, and practical molecular memory devices remain mostly theoretical even today. If the Kessler account is accurate, Soviet scientists had created working molecular memory systems in the early 1980s. Then this technology was hidden inside one of the most bizarre espionage programs ever conceived, where it languished in classified obscurity while Western researchers slowly reinvented similar concepts. It's a reminder that technological progress isn't always linear, and that sometimes the most advanced developments happen in secret, serving purposes far removed from their original intent. Now, let's talk about the physics of what made these capsules theoretically work, because this is where the story intersects with some genuinely cutting-edge materials science. The dipolar molecules embedded in the polymer matrix were likely based on organic compounds with strong permanent electric dipole moments, molecules where electron distribution creates distinct positive and negative poles. When you apply an external electric field, these molecules physically rotate to align with the field. And crucially, many dipolar molecules remain in their aligned state even after the field is removed, a property called beast. This is the fundamental principle behind modern ferroelectric memory, a technology that's still being perfected in contemporary semiconductor research. The Soviet implementation apparently used a class of molecules called as compounds that can switch between two distinct geometric configurations when exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Each configuration represents a binary state, a 0 or a 1. By packing trillions of these molecules into a polymer film and addressing them with precisely focused electromagnetic pulses, you could theoretically encode enormous amounts of information in a space smaller than a grain of sand. The reading process would have been equally exotic, since extracting data would scramble the molecular orientations. The readout system had to be completely non-destructive up until the moment of actual data retrieval. One possibility, based on descriptions in Kessler's interviews, is that the KGB used a form of dielectric spectroscopy, where the capsule was placed in an oscillating electric field and the system measured how the molecular dipoles responded to different frequencies. Since molecules in different orientations respond differently to electromagnetic stimulation, you could map the entire data structure without actually disturbing it, essentially creating a ghost image of the stored information. Then, when you were ready to retrieve the data, you'd hit the capsule with a high-intensity pulse that simultaneously read and scrambled the molecular orientations in a single, irreversible operation. It's an elegant solution to the security problem, though it makes the technology fundamentally sick. The chemical treatment that allowed these capsules to be embedded in earwax without causing immune responses or infections is another technical mystery that deserves attention. Human cerumen is a complex biological substance, a mixture of shed skin cells, secretions from specialized glands, and various lipids that protect the ear canal from bacteria and moisture. Introducing a foreign object into this environment typically triggers inflammation or infection as the body's immune system recognizes the intrusion. The fact that operatives could carry these capsules in their ear canals for days or weeks without apparent complications suggests that Soviet biomedical researchers had developed sophisticated surface treatments that mimicked the molecular structure of natural. Modern medical implants use similar biomimetic coatings to reduce rejection. But again, this was the early 1980s. The Soviets were apparently solving material science problems that wouldn't become mainstream research topics for another 20 years. There's also a darker possibility that's been suggested by former Soviet bioethics researchers who've studied the program. Some of the operatives may have undergone minor surgical modifications to their ear canals, creating small pockets or recesses where capsules could be stored without contact with the sensitive tympanic membrane. This would explain how agents could carry capsules comfortably for extended periods, and might also account for the watch-based extraction mechanism. A surgically created pocket would provide a reliable, standardized storage location that the extraction device could target precisely. If this is true, and it remains unconfirmed, it means the KGB was willing to perform permanent anatomical modifications on operatives for this program. That level of commitment speaks to how seriously they took Wax Channel's operational potential, even if that potential was never fully realized. But here's the question that haunts everyone who studies this program. Did it actually work? Beyond the anecdotal success of agents like Reason, is there evidence that Wax Channel produced actionable intelligence that influenced Soviet decisions? The honest answer is we don't know. The KGB's internal assessment documents remain classified, and the few accounts from former operatives are frustratingly vague about operational outcomes. Intelligence work is notoriously difficult to evaluate in real time. A single piece of information might seem insignificant when collected, but prove critical months or years later when combined with other intelligence. It's possible that Wax Channel generated valuable insights that were simply attributed to other sources in official reporting. It's equally possible that the program was an expensive failure, a technically impressive solution to a problem that didn't really exist. The Cold War is littered with elaborate intelligence operations that consumed enormous resources while producing minimal results. What we can say with certainty is that Wax Channel represents a particular moment in intelligence history when agencies were willing to explore genuinely unconventional approaches to covert communication. The 1980s were a transitional period, caught between the analog tradecraft of earlier decades and the digital revolution that would transform intelligence work in the 90s. Programs like Wax Channel emerged from this liminal space, attempting to bridge biological and technological systems in ways that now seem almost steampunk. In their mechanical ingenuity, there's something almost poetic about intelligence operatives dancing in Soviet discos, their ear canals loaded with molecular memory capsules, conducting espionage through the vocabulary of body movement and musical rhythm. It's so far removed from our contemporary image of intelligent work, all servers and satellites and algorithmic analysis, that it barely seems like the same profession. The disco setting itself deserves more consideration as we try to understand why the KGB thought this approach would work. Nightclubs in the Cold War era occupied a unique social and legal space, especially in the Soviet Union. They were simultaneously sites of state surveillance and zones of relative freedom where normal social rules were suspended. The darkness, the noise, the physical proximity of body, all of these environmental factors created what sociologists call liminal space, areas where usual social boundaries become permeable. In such spaces, a brief moment of physical contact carries no inherent significance. You could press against a stranger, shout in their ear, even embrace them momentarily as part of dancing, and none of this would register as unusual. The KGB understood that human perception is context-dependent. The same action that would seem deeply suspicious in a park or cafe becomes invisible on a crowded dance floor. They were weaponizing not just the physical environment, but the social expectations and perceptual frameworks that govern behavior in those spaces. This points to a broader truth about intelligence tradecraft that's often overlooked. The best covert operations aren't the ones that happen in darkness and secrecy. They're the ones that hide in plain sight, camouflaged by the ordinary textures of social life. A dead drop in a hollow tree requires counterintelligence officers to ignore millions of trees and focus on the handful being used for espionage. A dance floor collision requires them to monitor billions of casual human interactions and identify the handful with intelligence significance. The mathematics of surveillance make the latter essentially impossible. Even with unlimited resources, you can't meaningfully monitor the totality of human social interaction. Wax Channel exploited this fundamental asymmetry between offense and defense and intelligence work. The program also reveals something about Soviet institutional culture that contrasts sharply with Western intelligence approaches. American and British agencies in this period were investing heavily in technical collection systems, satellites and listening stations and computer networks. The assumption was that technology could solve intelligence problems through superior data gathering and analysis. The Soviets certainly pursued similar technical approaches, but they never fully abandoned human intelligence and tradecraft innovation. Programs like Wax Channel emerged from a culture that still valued elegance and creativity in operational planning, that was willing to invest in elaborate human systems, even as computers were beginning to reshape intelligence work. Whether this represented a strength or a weakness is debatable, but it resulted in operations that were often more imaginative, if not always more effective, than their Western counterparts. Let me take you deeper into one specific operation that illustrates how Wax Channel functioned in practice. In November of 1984, an operative with the cryptonym written was deployed to West Berlin with a mission profile that sounds like it was written by a particularly creative fiction author. Ritm's cover was as a photographer, specializing in nightlife documentation, a perfect excuse to frequent clubs, while maintaining a professional distance that explained carrying equipment and maintaining irregular hours. Over 3 months, Ritm established themselves in the city's underground dance scene, eventually gaining access to a venue called Turbine Rosenheim, which had become a gathering point for young professionals from both sides of the city. The target was a woman named Ingrid, surname still classified, who worked as a telecommunications engineer for Siemens and had unrestricted access to facilities developing early digital switching systems for military communications. The challenge was that Ingrid wasn't an ideological recruit or a blackmail target. She had no interest in politics and no exploitable vulnerabilities. What she did have was a passionate interest in new wave music and a habit of attending shows at Turbine every Friday night. Reeton's handler conceived an operation that was pure wax channel philosophy. Rather than attempting a traditional recruitment approach, they would use Ingrid as an unwitting courier, a separate agent embedded in Siemens. Through more conventional means, would encode technical specifications for the company's digital switching systems onto a molecular memory capsule. This capsule would be transferred to Ingrid during a dance floor encounter, where it would remain in her ear canal, completely undetected, for a period of days or weeks. Then, at a subsequent event, Ritm would execute a retrieval transfer, extracting the capsule during another choreographed collision. Ingrid would never know she'd served as a human dead drop, carrying classified information in her own body without any awareness or consent. The operation unfolded over 5 weeks. The initial transfer happened during a particularly crowded show by a British post-punk band whose name has been redacted from declassified documents. The extraction occurred at a smaller venue during a more intimate gathering, reducing the risk of accidental capsule loss. According to after-action reports that surfaced in Czech intelligence archives, the operation succeeded technically. The capsule was successfully transferred, carried, and reached. However, the intelligence value of the captured data was assessed as modest. The Siemens switching systems were already approaching obsolescence by the time the information reached Moscow, overtaken by rapid developments in digital technology. This was a recurring problem with human intelligence in the 80s. The tempo of technological change was beginning to outpace the operational cycles of traditional espionage. The Ingrid operation raises profound ethical questions that intelligence agencies still grapple with today, using unwitting civilians as couriers without their knowledge or consent crosses boundaries that even hardened intelligence professionals find troubling. Ingrid was neither agent nor target, just an ordinary person whose social habits made her useful to a foreign intelligence service. She presumably continued her life, never knowing that she'd been instrumentalized in this way, that her body had been briefly turned into an intelligence asset. Without her awareness, the KGB clearly had no moral qualms about this approach, but it represents a level of intrusion that goes beyond traditional espionage ethics. You could argue that every person surveilled by intelligence agencies experiences a similar violation of autonomy, but there's something particularly visceral about having a foreign device planted in your body, even if you never detect it. As we move toward the conclusion of this investigation, we need to address the question of whether any wax channel technology or tradecraft survived the Soviet collapse and might still be in use today. The honest answer is, we simply don't know, but there are suggestive hints. In 2012, a Russian cybersecurity researcher named Pavel Smirnov published a blog post, quickly deleted, claiming that FSB operatives had approached his team about developing ultra-miniaturized memory systems for unspecified covert purposes. Smirnov suggested that the agency was interested in updating Cold War-era biological concealment techniques using contemporary nanotechnology. The post vanished within hours, and Smirnov later claimed it had been a thought experiment. not a description of any actual project. But the fact that someone in Russia's intelligence community might be thinking along these lines suggests that the fundamental concepts behind Wax Channel retain operational appeal. Modern technology would make a contemporary version of Wax Channel dramatically more capable. Current microelectromechanic systems can pack functional electronics into spaces measured in micrometers. Biocompatible coatings derived from medical implant research could allow capsules to be carried indefinitely without immune response. Quantum dot memory systems, still experimental but theoretically proven, could store terabytes of data in volumes smaller than a grain of pollen. And, crucially, widespread use of wireless earbuds and hearing augmentation devices means that having objects in your ear canal no longer seems unusual. A modern Wax Channel operative could theoretically carry capsules that are simultaneously smaller, more capable, and less suspicious than anything available to the KGB in 1984. Whether any intelligence service has actually pursued this path remains an unanswered question, but the technical barriers that made Wax Channel exotic in the 80s have largely evaporated. The story of Discoteca Cosa and Operation Wax Channel sits at the intersection of so many fascinating threads. Cold War paranoia materials, science, social engineering, the weaponization of culture, biological espionage. It's a reminder that intelligence history contains chapters far stranger than anything in spy fiction. Precisely because reality doesn't need to be plausible. Real intelligence operations can be as weird and baroque as the minds that conceived them, constrained only by technical feasibility and bureaucratic approval. The fact that senior KGB officers thought biological dead drops via dance floor collisions was a reasonable investment of resources tells us something important about the Cold War mindset, the willingness to explore any vector, no matter how unconventional, that might provide an operational advantage. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire story is how much we still don't know. The KGB's archives remain largely closed. Most Wax Channel operatives, if they're still alive, have never spoken publicly about their involvement. The full technical specifications of the molecular memory capsules have never been released. We're left with fragments, declassified document excerpts, second-hand accounts, and a lot of informed speculation. It's entirely possible that the most interesting parts of this story remain classified. That Operation Wax Channel had dimensions and capabilities we haven't even glimpsed. Intelligence agencies are very good at protecting their most sensitive methods, and biotechnical concealment systems would certainly qualify. So we're left with a historical puzzle wrapped in multiple layers of classification and ambiguity. A Moscow disco that may have been a spy training facility. Dance floor collisions that may have been intelligence transfers. Earwax that may have concealed molecular memory capsules carrying NATO secrets. Technology that may have been adapted from Venus lander missions. Operatives who may have had their ear canals surgically modified. Each layer peels back to reveal another question. Another gap in the historical record. Maybe that's appropriate for a story about a program that specialized in hiding things in plain sight, in making the extraordinary look ordinary. The truth about Discoteca Cosmos might be hiding in archives, in elderly memories, in technical documentation gathering dust in Obnesk or Moscow. Or maybe the truth is exactly what we've uncovered here. A brief moment in intelligence history when disco and espionage collided in the most literal possible way. If you found this deep dive into one of the Cold War's strangest operations as fascinating as I did, you're going to want to stick around. This channel is dedicated to excavating the buried stories of intelligence history, the operations that are too weird for mainstream coverage, the technology that was too advanced for its time, the intersections of culture and covert action that reveal how strange reality actually is. Hit that like button if this story bent your mind a little. Subscribe for more investigations into the shadows of history, and drop a comment with your theories about what other Cold War programs might still be hiding in classified archives. Did other agencies develop their own versions of biological concealment? Are their contemporary operations using these same principles with modern technology? What do you think happened to the operatives who literally carried these secrets in their bodies? The comment section is where we continue the investigation together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, where we're going to explore something even stranger.